Hi guys, how are you today? It is a overcloud and overcast and cloudy and dismal day, so it's a perfect day to be sitting in the studio painting. We're gonna have a lot of fun today. The first thing we have to do today is take care of the winners from last week's live. And the brush set went to, and I know I'm gonna mess this up. I can promise you I'm gonna mess this up. It's Kathleen Januszewski was the winner of the Dynasty Faux Squirrel rounds. Betty Van Pelt was the winner of one of our stamp sets, and Terry Casper was the winner of the other stamp set. So ladies, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you all for joining me every Saturday for the last few weeks. You have been amazing. It's been so much fun. So we have a couple of things. We post these live videos onto my YouTube channel, but there are a lot of videos on my YouTube channel that are not done live. So if you want to be updated when we post new video to my YouTube channel, don't forget to subscribe. So just visit my YouTube channel and hit the subscribe button, and you'll get notifications of every time we put up a new video. And brushes. That was the other thing I want to talk about was brushes. Thebrushguys.com. They have a coupon code, give you an additional discount. If you order from them, you can use the code TracyM, and you'll get a nice little extra on that one. They have great service and a great selection, and they carry all of my favorite faux squirrel brushes and my favorite Dynasty black gold brushes and my stencil brushes, and they carry all sorts of goodies that I know that you have to have because, you know, that's what we're like. We have to have all of the toys. And what else? A couple of new patterns went up this week. We have a little surprise for you for next Saturday. The pattern is already up on the website, so we'll show you that a little later on. And we have a great giveaway for this week. As usual, Dynasty has been amazing. So they have given me a bunch of goodies to give you. You know that I'm always using my favorite fugly brush. This is the Dynasty Encaustic. This is the oval, but I love the Dynasty Encaustic brushes. So we have a really great 2 sets of Dynasty Hot Wax Encaustic brushes to give away. And the big giveaway this week is this amazing set of Dynasty Black Gold Specialty brushes. It has a gorgeous deerfoot, a big script, a short liner, 2 beautiful fountain brushes, and these amazing, I forgot what they're called. Oh yeah, famous painter. Can't remember the name of the brush. I don't use them very much. Rake brushes. Oh my gosh. Not either too much coffee or not enough. I'm not sure which. Yeah, so there's 2 rake brushes in there, and then this gorgeous big oval wash brush in there as well. So one of you that comments and shares the video is going to get one of these. And 2 of you that comment and share the video are going to get this gorgeous set of the hot wax brushes. So as usual, Dynasty is incredibly generous with me, so we have gorgeous stuff to give away. Today we are working on Family Gathers Here. That's the sunflower piece. I love this piece. It's really pretty, and I think it's going to look great hanging on my front door this fall. Beautiful piece. So we're going to get started. You don't need to have a whole lot of materials for this one. It's a pretty simple one. Don't need any super special equipment for this. It's pretty straightforward. So let's get started. This is it. This is Family Gathers Here. I went with some straightforward lettering and just kept it really simple with these just 2 sunflowers, some leaves, a little bit of vine work, and of course my favorite, you know, that barn board look in the background. This is one of my favorites. And I love sunflowers. Sunflowers are just such a happy, happy flower. So let's get started on this. We're going to start with this background. It's really simple. So I've already prepped a few boards. This is just an 8 by 10 for doing samples. This is just an easy way to do it. It's pretty banged up, but it'll work. And the first color I'm using is warm white. So I'm going to put a little of that warm white on my palette. Oop, bottle's almost empty. It's making weird noise. And the brush has to be nice and wet. You have to have a good amount of water in it because you want this paint to be a little uncontrolled. Dry in places, wet in others. So depending on how you want the barn board to run is how you're going to apply this. So in this case, on the rectangular surface, it doesn't really matter, but it's just pulling it in one long stroke across the surface like this. And you can see where it's running out of paint. You're getting vertical or horizontal stria in here that are bright, and some where the black is showing through, less in some places, more in others. And you just put that on and let those flaws happen. There's beauty in the flaws. Neatness doesn't count. Perfection is to be avoided at all costs. So look at that. So now we've got those nice stria. Now, if you were working on this type of surface, just a rectangular surface, and you wanted the stria to be vertical, the boards to be vertical, you'd simply turn it this way and then run your tape lines vertically. If you want them horizontal, then obviously you're going to leave it this way. In the piece on the circle, the surface already has those grooves in place. So you're kind of married to having them run horizontally. However, the back of the surface is perfectly smooth. So if you wanted the boards to run vertically, you would simply paint the back and then apply the white paint vertically. It's simple as that. So you're not married to having them going horizontally. You can do it just simply by using the smooth side of the board. So easy peasy. So this is it. That is as difficult as that barn board technique gets. This is not rocket science. So in order to make this look a little bit more realistic, we need to put some spaces in these boards. And that part is super simple. Let me grab my other board. Here we go. So here we have a board already prepped. Now we're going to tape this off and give ourselves a nice little groove in these boards. If I can ever find the end of the tape. Here we go. So I need a piece. Now ideally these need to be nice and straight. You know, in a perfect world we would use the ruler, measure off the distance so that we have about 3-inch boards. But we're going to eyeball this one. Now we need about 1/8 of an inch space in between these. Not too thick, not too thin. 1/4 inch is too much, but 1/8 of an inch is just about perfect. So there, we've got that one in place. I'm going to do one more board. I'm going to come down here so that we have roughly 3 inches. And I do mean roughly. There we go. And then about 1/8 of an inch in between. There we go. So this is going to be that space between those boards. This just gives it a little more realism, and it creates the illusion that there's depth and distance. So we're going to take just lamp black, the same color as the original base coat. Now you could do this part with a stencil brush, or you can do it with a regular, and any paintbrush will do just fine. And you're just going to paint that in. And it's fairly unforgiving. You just, or forgiving, I should say, not unforgiving. Just slap it in there. Neatness doesn't count with this one. These are old weathered boards. You don't have to worry about getting them perfect. Let's just paint that in. I'm just using one of my favorite scruffy looking brushes for hammering color in. I think we all have one of those in our paint box. You know, it's hit that point where it doesn't do the original job it was intended for very well, but it still works for other things. So here we go. So now you're going to take the tape off. Now I have a tip about taking painter's tape off of surfaces. We have all done this, where you're removing the tape from something and you end up pulling the paint off of your surface, not just the paint you just put down, but the paint underneath it. There is a trick to doing that, and it's simply this. Pull the tape at a 45-degree angle and keep the tape low to the surface. Just like that. That way you don't pull the tape off of your background, or the paint off of your background. So 45-degree angle, keep it nice and low to the surface, and it will pull it off without harming anything. And the reason you do this is that if you apply tape to a surface that's just been recently painted, it's dry to the touch, but it's not cured. If I were to pull it straight up, it creates too much surface tension on the fresh paint, and you end up pulling it off. This way it reduces the amount of surface tension, and then it gives you a nice clean remove so that you're not damaging your paint surface. Just like that. Easy peasy. That wasn't hard. So now we need to make these jump out. We need to make that space between those two boards really pop. So what we're going to do is take a little asphaltum and an angled shader, and we're going to shade darkest value towards that line. Just put a haphazard float of asphaltum on either side of that line. Just like so. Again, neatness doesn't count. Perfection is to be avoided at all costs. If you made this too perfect, it would look too perfect, and then it wouldn't look like burn board. Had a small crisis in the studio this morning. I discovered I'm down to my last bottle of asphaltum. Here's hoping that Decor starts shipping it to us pretty soon. There we go, asphaltum. Oops. So that little bit of a shadow changes how this looks completely. It ages the edges of these boards a little bit, and it helps give them a little bit more depth than just the flat. The other thing is it warms this up a little. The black with the white over the black looks a little cold, so you need to warm it up a little bit. So a little bit of that asphaltum on either side of those grooves. And then I'm going to take that same color and go around the edges. And again, neatness doesn't count. I'm not looking for a perfect float here. I'm just looking to age those edges a little. And I ran out of water. Too much paint, not enough water. There we go. So lay that float in, and then I just sort of wiggle the brush back and forth. It gives that sort of a wood look. This is easy peasy, but it does change the look of this drastically. It gives it a warm feel. Let's see who's online today. Okay, it doesn't want to scroll again today. The laptop doesn't like me. Okay, so we'll finish out this edge. You can put a light wash of that asphaltum over top of that. Turn this around a little bit. And when I say loose, I'm not putzing here. I'm just putting a little color at the edges. So now you can see that that has changed that barn board look quite a bit. My technician has been helping me get this laptop to scroll. So I could say hi to a few people. Cindy Moreau, thanks for joining me again. And Sue Potts, honey, nice to see you too. Rhonda Biggs, yes, I will have all those patterns in old. Thank you, dear. And Christina, hi, sweetie. How are you feeling after your surgery? I hope you're really doing well. Oh my goodness. Everybody's on here today. Denise, mwah. Hi, niece. How are you, sweetie? Wow, we got a bunch of you on today. That's great. Okay, so we are ready to move to the next step. I like putzing with this a bit, darkening edges and whatnot. The next step is to trace and transfer your line drawing and your lettering onto this surface. I like to do that with white graphite. I'm not a big, huge fan of dark graphite. I like the lighter color because it's easier to contend with, but that's not always easy to do because sometimes the color simply doesn't allow us to use a white. So this one, hopefully you can see it. It is there. I used a white graphite to transfer this on. So, and I use my my gel pen. I like these gel pens for transferring, and for this reason is that that point is very, very fine, and so you get fine lines instead of the larger, thick lines. And it's much easier to maintain the detail in things if you have a nice sharp point. I find with a stylus, a lot of the time some of the detail gets lost. And so that I really like. And I also noticed that I missed a petal when I was transferring. So I'm going to come here and put one in. Because, there we go. I missed one. So just put a leaf in there or a petal in there. So transferring the lettering, let's talk about that. The flowers are pretty much straightforward. If you've done this before, then you know how to get your transfer on. But lettering is a different creature. So this is what I do. Me and my steel rulers. I put a nice, crisp, clean, straight line where the lettering touches. And I put a line that goes off the edge of the paper, right across. And then I'll put a line measured down, a nice straight and level line onto my surface. In this case, we don't need to do that because we have a nice straight level line, and that's that groove in the surface. So I take my line drawing and I line it up so that the line underneath this lettering lines up with the top of that groove, just like that. And then I tape it into place and transfer the line drawing. Nothing else changes. The graphite goes under, you trace and transfer. Another tip, when you're doing lettering, anything that is vertical at an angle or perfectly straight, if it's vertical, get out that ruler and trace those lines like this. And the reason you do this is because then the lettering has nice, clean vertical and horizontal lines. We are ingrained from birth to read things from top to bottom, left to right. And so anything that is vertical or horizontal, if it is out of true, if it is not level or straight, the eye will pick it up. And it will drive you crazy. It drives me crazy. So this is what you should do. I take that, firmly believe in having a good stainless steel or steel ruler because the edges don't get chipped and they don't get dinged up. So you'll always get a nice straight, clean line. So that's my tip for tracing on your lettering. And that way it's always nice and straight. Nothing will ruin a painted piece faster than bad lettering. Wonky lettering. Doesn't matter how beautiful the painted work is, if the lettering is not crisp, clean, and straight, it just doesn't look right. So now we're going to talk about base coating. We're going to start with the leaves. I always like working from the back out. with things, so that anything that I paint afterwards is going to fill in and cover up any little whoopsies, because we know we make them. So the color I use for my leaves is antique green, and I very rarely do more than one coat of antique green. So I'm going to apply this in the shape of the leaf. I always follow the shape of the leaf. Just like so. And I'm fast. I don't putz with things. I putz later with the details, but I don't putz when it comes to base coating. So notice that the paint, as I'm pulling it, it's always in the shape of the leaf, adhering to the shape of the leaf. Now, yes, I know you can still see all of the woodwork, that wood grain in the background. That's okay. By the time we're done, it won't matter. And again, always following the shape of that leaf. I love this green. This antique green is such a beautiful mid-range color for this type of thing. If you have a close look at my painted pieces, a lot of the time some of that texture from that background is showing through. It doesn't matter. It just lends more character to the leaves. And my painting style is fairly loose. It's not heavily structured, so I don't worry about fully opaque. Usually most of the stuff I paint has 4 or 5 different colors on it, so making sure I have a fully opaque coat the first time out really isn't all that important. There, didn't take too long to paint 3 leaves. And then you get these funky little leaves that I have tucked away here and there. Again, I just follow the shape of the leaf. I don't worry too much about getting them fully opaque. It doesn't matter. Now, we talk about petals. I like to use either a warm white or a light buttermilk for base coats when I'm doing this. We need this because we're working with yellow, and yellow is very transparent. We need these to be a little more opaque, more for brightness than anything. So I'm using a little bit of light buttermilk, and again, I follow the shape of the petal when I apply the color. And again, not fully opaque. And the one thing I do is leave a very narrow space in shapes like that. I don't know if we can zoom in a little tighter on this so you can see. It's a very tiny space in between elements. I hate tracing things on, that's why. Now that little space, you don't need to worry about it because when you're doing your shading, it's going to hide it anyhow. So, of course, the smaller that space is, the better. So, I'm just going to do a few petals here so that you can see where everything goes. These are fairly straightforward. Neatness doesn't count. And that light buttermilk is going to be used later on too. So you can see they're not fully opaque. Always following the shape of the petal. Okay, we're going to just do one more here, and then I'll show you. And we'll do something with the center so that you can see how that's done. Okay. So that's about as extensive as my base coat usually is. It's, as I said, it's never fully opaque because I'm using 4 different colors for each of these petals. They will eventually get there, so I don't really worry too much about it on the first step. So the center of this flower is asphaltum. Who knew? So I'm just going to grab my scruffy brush here. Now the asphaltum, again, is I just sort of pat that in place. I like the texture. You know, that neatness doesn't count thing, because honestly it really doesn't at this stage. So there we go. It's just creating a little texture on these flowers like so. And then the only place you really need to take any care is when you get down here where those edges of those flowers are, or the petals, I'm sorry. So you just sort of pity pat it in. So there's that texture. I just saw a petal I want to fill in real quick because I just think it's interesting. Oop, too much water. Way too much water. There we go. They're playing with the laptop again. We're trying to see some of this. What type of brush do I base coat with? That depends entirely on the space that I'm painting. I usually choose a brush that's appropriate to the size of the space. I tend to lean towards filberts for a lot of base coating. I like that clean, sharp edge. This particular filbert is a number 4. I don't usually go past a number 8, depending on the size of the piece that I'm painting, but an 8, so a 4, a 6, and an 8 are generally good sizes to have. I do like my filberts for base coating, depending on the size of the surface. Obviously, if it's a larger surface, I'll switch to bigger rounds, but I do like my, my filberts. Okay, so I've got a few petals here. I'll get them, I think they're almost dry. So the next color you're going to put on to these petals is Sunny Day, which is, this is a really pretty color from Deckwart. It's a very soft yellow, very, very soft, and it's nicely opaque. It's actually a pretty good yellow for painting sunflowers because it's a very sunny. So, and again, that yellow is going to go on in the same fashion that I did that light buttermilk. It goes on, and again, I pay attention to where that space is. I paint up to it, and again, I'm not worried about opacity so much at this point, because honestly it isn't going to make much of a difference. I love this yellow. It's just such a bright and happy yellow. Again, up to the line, and always following the shape of the petal. Oops. And it is nicely opaque. Yellows are notoriously transparent and difficult to paint with to get coverage, but this one is actually quite good, and it's such a lovely color. There we go. Now I'm going to be shading these and highlighting these with the fluid acrylic. And we're going to be using some unusual colors, perhaps colors you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in a sunflower. Now the colors that I'm using for the shading and highlighting on this sunflower are quinacridone magenta, which is a very hot, high pink, even a touch of purple in it, really. This quinacridone magenta. And we're also using quinacridone gold, which isn't technically gold, it's more of a red, but these are the two colors that we're going to be shading these petals with. And they're going to be rather surprising, but they are very pretty. I love the tones they create. So I'll finish out base coating these petals, and again, follow the shape of the petal. And we're almost there. Okay. There. And still not fully opaque, and still doesn't really matter at this stage. So let's come back, now that those leaves are dry, let's come back there, and we're going to start with some shading. Now, for the shading on these leaves, I'm using the fluid acrylic sap green. This, if you don't have the sap green and you want to shade these leaves at home, then plantation pine is about the next best color for that. So a little bit. Now I'm switching over to, I've been using the black gold filberts for base coating, and I'm going to switch over to a 3/8 angle from Faux Squirrel. I really like, because they hold a lot of water and they hold a lot of colors, so they're ideal for floating. So it's a tip load, which just means that you're picking up a small quantity of that sap green on the tip of the brush, and then you're just going to blend out as if you're going to float. So we're going to start with this leaf here, and you'll notice I'm not floating in the traditional sense. I'm kind of working in a circular fashion. So up nice and tight to that petal. Just lay some of that color in. And then as soon as it runs out, you go and pick up some more. There we go. So we'll let this one dry, and then we'll tackle one of the other leaves. So I'm thinking we'll come to this one, this little one here. Same thing, plantation pine, keep the color nice and tight to the edge of the petal. And down in here. And you can walk that sort of float out a little bit so that you get more color going down the petal, or down the leaf, I'm sorry. Don't worry about getting it utterly perfect the first time out. It doesn't matter at this stage. So I'm going to turn this around so that we can get this color in here. Like so. I'm going to pick up a little more. I love the transparency of these fluid acrylics, because you can layer color and get oodles of tone, lots of variation. You'll have great control over your shading. Because they're transparent, you can get all kinds of neat effects with them. Just lovely colors. I'll deepen this a little bit. Nice part is that that control is there with fluid acrylic. You can layer color until you're happy with it. If it's not dark enough, you just let it dry and put another layer of color on. It works beautifully. So you can control where it goes, how much goes. Lovely color. And as I said, if you don't have the fluid acrylics, I do have some suggestions about which Americana colors you can use instead. So in this particular case, plantation pine is an ideal substitute. There we go. Now to highlight those leaves, I like margarita. I like that, this is one of my favorites. I love this color. The green gold will work, but I like the opacity of the margarita. So I'm going to use that to put my highlights in. I haven't changed the brush. I'm still working with the same brush. And again, it's a tip load. So you just need a small quantity on the tip of the brush, not a lot of paint. Blend it out as if to float. Now to put that highlight in, let's turn this. I'm going to do this leaf down here. Let's put that highlight in. I've got that brush just like that. And again, always in the shape of the leaf. I always follow the shape of the leaf. And a little quick chisel blend along the edge. Sit down the center. And a chisel blend along the edge. Then take that same margarita out to the outside edge of the leaf. Just like that. Now you can enhance that shadow down the center at any time. You just go back in with another float of that plantation pine. So there's my float, and I'm going to just pat and blend, and I'll do the same thing at the tip of this leaf. Doesn't take much. Now you understand why you didn't need to have it fully opaque. There's that little highlight there, and it's loose. It's very loose. There's no fussing and putzing with it. It's just loose. Get that color on. If you've got it well blended on the brush, it'll work. Just like that. And it's just blending it back, and a little punch of it on the upper edge as well. If ever you find that perhaps your highlights have become a little overworked, just go back to your darker value. If you want to enhance that shadow down the center of the leaf again, just put a nice little float of that plantation pine in there. That will take care of things. Or that sap green. And you'll notice that every time you put a float of these fluid acrylics over top, it gets a little bit deeper every time. There we go. Now, I always like to have a little bit of reflected color on leaves. So whatever the flower is, let's say it's in this case sunflower. If it was a red rose, then I would use a little bit of red. But in this case, it's a little yellow. So I'm going to pick up a little of that diarylite yellow, which is that really bright yellow that we're going to use on the sunflowers. And I'm just pulling a little bit in a few places. Not everywhere, but it just brightens some of the highlights on the edges of those leaves. And it ties the leaves to the flowers. We forgot about this little guy down here. So these little leaves are fairly simple. I just float a little of that the sap green right here. Just enough to darken one end of the leaf. And then I take that margarita and I come down here and I brighten the highlight at the tip of the leaf. That's about it. That's about all I do. For those little leaves, you don't need to do much. So now we're back to these petals. Now that they're completely dry and we're ready to work, we're going to start with the quinacridone gold. This color is very transparent. It's also a very strong color. It is kind of like burnt sienna, kind of. It has a much higher red in it, but yet it's a gold. It's gorgeous and it's very transparent. So this is our shading color. Oops, too much water here. There we go. This is our shading color on these flowers. Again, make sure you blend it out, lots of water, so that that color is a little bit thin. And again, neatness doesn't count. We're not really worrying about opacity or perfect shadows yet, because we have a ways to go. But I do like to take that color right into, I'm having a problem with my brush here. I'm going to ditch this one and grab a different one. That one is giving me grief. Okay. Has a little hair sticking out of it and it's messing up my float. Ah, there we go. That's better. Much better. Okay. So now it's just putting this color in. Oh yeah, much better. And you notice I don't putz with my floats much. I just want to get them in. As long as I've got a clean transition from one to the other, I'm good. I don't really worry about meticulous at this point, although this brush is giving me grief too. I don't think it's holding enough water. There we go. I don't think I let it soak long enough. Now it's a strong color over top of this yellow, so don't panic. Things will come together. And all those little gaps and whatnot will disappear, I promise you. I know they kind of bother people that have seeing those spaces, but in the end, they will disappear. Okay. So I'm going to make a little bit of noise. Just a bit. I'm just going to dry this real quick. There we go. So we've got that first shading in, and it always, I know it always looks so rough when you first put that shading in. But now we're going to add some quinacridone magenta. So this is a pretty intense red. But once I have it in place, I'm going to give my angle a good soak here. So it's, again, a tip load. Let me show you just how strong this color is. If you look right here, look how vibrant that pink is. That is an in-your-face pink. And why in God's name would I ever want to put that on a sunflower? Well, I'm going to show you. So I wanted a really robust orange tone to this. And obviously a red and an orange are going to give you, or a red and a yellow are going to give you an orange. So I'm going to put that gorgeous bright pink onto those petals, and it instantly turns to this beautiful robust orange. a deep reddish orange. So that's the trick and the secret of working with fluid acrylics, is that when you take one color, a thin transparent layer, and you layer it over top of another color, the new color is immediately affected by the previous. So let's put a bit more of that gorgeous red on these sunflowers. It's scary, but that red will give you a beautiful rich orange. We've all seen those beautiful sunflowers with those brilliant deep reds and gorgeous ochre tones. You can create that with these fluid acrylics. So you've seen in white flowers, like when we did the orchids, using the blue and then the magenta over top of the white, and it gives you a soft lavender tone, not just a pink tone, but a very soft lavender tone, and it worked really well in the orchids. And we're using that same concept to do these sunflowers. So when you put these beautiful rich reds, I need some more water here. You put these rich reds over top of that yellow, you get a gorgeous orange. And the nice part is that you can layer. One float on top of another just deepens the color. Would we use burnt sienna if we don't have fluid acrylic? And what color would we use for the magenta? Okay, so there is a really good, the burnt sienna will work really well. Just make sure that you thin it out. And to replace the magenta fluid acrylic, a tiny bit of Tuscan red will work just as well. You need a really transparent red, and the Tuscan is going to give you that gorgeous tone. So try the Tuscan red. It's not going to be a perfect conversion because you're not working with the same type of paint at all, but it will give you that gorgeous orange. You just have to take your time with it. I absolutely love that rich orange tone in these, especially in sunflowers. I just think it's so pretty. Okay, so I'm just about where I want to be for this next step, which kind of throws people off a little bit. So we're going to add a little bit of the light buttermilk to highlight the tips of these petals. Now it is opaque, so let's come up here. And it's also where we're going to add a little bit of a highlight. So this is just a float of light buttermilk on those highlight areas of the petals. Now these flowers are going to get pretty blah looking, I'll warn you now, because that light buttermilk is just going to sort of subdue some of that yellow, but there's a purpose behind this. We're going to put another color over top of this, and it is going to be very bright and very bold. And in order for the highlights to really be effective, we need a more opaque base to really show off this color. So as you're doing this, you're going to notice that it is getting kind of meh, mousy, blah, because the color, the heat, all that bright yellow is being subdued. But we are going to put it back, I promise you. It's also an opportunity to clean up any little rough spots, you know, areas that you're not particularly keen on. And little rough areas and whatnot. This is a great way to clean those up. But again, I'm not putzing too much. I'm not worrying too much about accuracy at this point. It gives the petals and the flowers a loose appearance and a loose feeling, and it doesn't look so heavily structured. Okay, so I've got some light buttermilk in place in these highlight areas. We're going to give that a chance to dry, and I'm going to come back to these leaves. I like the leaves to look kind of lacy and soft, and I do that by adding a line towards the outside of the leaves. I also have to connect some of them. So I have my margarita, and I'm going to pick up a little bit of warm white just to lighten it a little bit. And this is my branches and twigs are done with this thinned margarita with a little bit of warm white. But I like to soften the edges of my leaves slightly with a loose little scribbly line, so to speak. And it just softens the edges of those leaves. It also highlights them a little too. But it's not right perfectly on the edge of the leaf. I'm sort of on and off again, a little scribbly and very soft. So use your favorite liner brush or your favorite rigger and just soften them a little bit. And any little curly cues and whatnot are going to be done with this color as well. And those are just, you know, really loose and simple. Of course, I messed that up. The nice part is that I can take either a baby wipe or a little bit of shop towel and some water, and I can take it off. So just, let's see, we'll try this again, see if I can't mess it up again. And if I try really hard, I might. There we go. So a few little curly cues with the little leaves. In the original line drawing, there's 2 clusters of leaves, one on either end. And they're just very loose. Keep them soft to keep them loose. And I do the same thing to these little guys too. But I don't worry about getting them too perfect. Just soft scribbly lines. I like my soft scribbly lines. Okay, someone had a question. We're just trying to find it here. Oh, Nancy, I am doing it. This is just a demo board. This is the original piece. This is available from Cupboard Distributing at cdwood.com. But this one is just the demo piece. Is there an alternate color to use instead of asphaltum? Yeah, Dagward even shows. See, now you know why I'm panicked, because I only have one bottle. It's hard to say. Asphaltum is one of those colors that's really unique. However, you can take a little bit of transparent yellow and add it to a burnt umber, but just small quantities. Burnt umber is about the closest that you can come, although it has a lot more red in it. But that's generally about the closest you're going to come. I just like to add a little bit of yellow to it, and then I thin it out a lot. But that will work. So there's our leaves. I think our petals are just about dry. Now, these are looking a little blasé, these little petals. So they need some life and they need some heat back to make them look sunny and bright. And this is how I do that. Grab your favorite angle brush, and you're going to tip load it into some of that diarrhea yellow, which is this hot school bus yellow in the fluid acrylics. Just a tiny amount on the brush, and then work it into the brush so that and then you just apply a wash of this color over the whole flower, all over everything, like the petals. And right away, that color jumps. All of those reds and oranges and browns that you put on become instantly more orange and more brown. That highlight becomes instantly more yellow, vibrant and sunny. It's a great way to tone all of those things that you've done. And it connects everything. You see how those little spaces that I showed you between things, if we zoom in a little bit, all of those little tiny spaces have almost disappeared. Look how pretty that is. So all of those colors just popped because you put that wash of diarrhea yellow over everything. And you're not married to it as is. If at any time you want to deepen some shadows, I like doing that with a little float of asphaltum. So if there's areas that I want them to be a little bit darker, I will use a little asphaltum to deepen those. Asphaltum is my favorite color. I use it for toning and aging and shading all sorts of things. Pretty. I love sunflowers, and this is just one of the easiest ways to paint them. So we're coming to the center portion of this flower, and there's a divot in the middle, just a little divot. We're going to shade that with a little bit of the carbon black, or the lamp black if you have them. So I'm going to pick up a little of that on my shader. And just in the center, I'm going to put a little float like so. Again, neatness doesn't count. It's easy peasy. The brown color, spell it A-S-P-H-A-L-T-U-M, asphaltum. Peggy, yes, Peggy Blazer, we are going to post this later. It will be on my YouTube channel. It'll also be available on the website. I'm going to scroll through here and answer a few questions if I can, if you have them. Yeah, that diarrhea yellow really does make things pop. I love it. Yeah, Judith Laubacher, yes, I don't use a whole lot of paint, especially because of the fluid acrylic. The fluid acrylic, you only need small quantities of paint. It's vibrant, it's very transparent, so you get tons and tons and tons of color with very little paint. So I've got my shadow in the center, and I'm going to do the same thing along here. I'm going to put a little shadow along there as well, because this is down in the belly. And again, neatness doesn't really count. So now I need to highlight the center of this a little bit. And that's where that great little deer foot comes in handy. I've got that, my little deer foot. I'm going to pick up a little of the asphaltum on the deer foot. And on the tip of it, I'm going to pick up just a touch of that sunny day. And I'm going to pat a little on the surface, and this is how I highlight that edge right there. Remember what I said about not really needing it to be fully opaque? This is why, because there's so many layers of color that go on top of this that it isn't really essential. And then I'm going to do the same thing with just a little of that yellow up here. And so you can see why it's not really urgent to use a lot of color. In the diarrhea, saffron yellow is probably the closest Americana color to the diarrhea yellow. So saffron yellow will work just fine. So you can see my sunflower is taking shape. I don't use the deer foot very often, but for this, I really do like it. So let's brighten that a little bit. There we go. Okay, we're almost there with the center. Now, when it comes to putting in textures in the middle, I like to use a variety of colors. I find if I'm just using black and white, it doesn't work all that well, but I start with the end of my freaker brush. You can use the stylus to do this if you're not keen on using your brush handle, or if you like your dots smaller. With the brush handle, I like that I get a mixture of sizes. So it's just little dip dots around like so. And I put some of those dip dots in the center as well, like that. I'm getting the signal that I keep dropping out of the shot, so there we go. And then you can switch to asphaltum from the black and start adding those so that they intermix with some of the black, and then move further out. The reason I do this is so that it doesn't look like you have a line, that it doesn't just stop, that it continues a little further. And it's okay if some of those dots are a mixture of the colors, that's fine too. It just creates a little visual texture on these sunflowers. So then I move to a little bit of that light buttermilk. I don't go right to white because even the buttermilk is a little bright. And so I try to keep these dots, you know, a bit more under control and a little less of them. And so you need to have those highlights. Don't forget, there's nothing wrong with taking some of these dots up onto the petals. It softens that boundary between. So don't be shy taking those dip dots out onto the edges of the petals. It's just fine. So we are almost there with this sunflower. There's a few little things. I like using my pen, my gel pen. That's the Uniball Signo that I use. So this pen I use a great deal for doing a bunch of different things. And one of the things I like doing is just adding a little sketchy line. I do this with my daisies, I do it with almost everything. I just like how it looks. It just sort of softens the edges of things a little and gives you the chance to put in, you know, some sketchy little details. And it pulls the eye towards the flower. I'm not putting a hard line, it's just a sketchy little line. It helps define them just a little bit. Now these gel pens, once they're completely dry, matte, medium, or varnish doesn't bother them at all. In this humidity, I would give it a full 24 hours before you put anything over top of it. But for the most part, within an hour, you can usually spray over them or brush varnish over them without too much difficulty. I like using these for a couple of reasons. One, they're a Japanese ink, and the ink is very, very dark. And it's beautifully opaque. The other benefit to this pen is that it is a stainless steel ball, so it tends not to stick. It also tends not to collect paint as you're working. So you can do all sorts of fun things with it. I transfer patterns with it. I do most of my design work with these because of that fine, sharp point. I have great control over it. And I just like how it looks. So even if you're wanting to sign things, they work beautifully on paint. So that is the final step to those sunflowers, is adding those dip dot highlights and shadows, and then using that Uniball Signo to do that sketchy outline on all the petals. It just softens the look of them. I love how it looks. So that's that Uniball Signo. Beautiful pen, and they work really, really well. So now we are down to doing this lettering, and you will note I did not do anything around this or this. There is some shading to do around both the flower and the lettering. And ordinarily, I do all of the shading in and around things before I start painting. So once the line drawing is transferred on, then I do all of the shading in and around my line drawing. But particularly when it comes to the lettering. So in lettering, I like to do my floats beforehand, because when you paint, then you don't have to try to get some of the shading off of the lettering. So I just shade into it and underneath. So down the right side and on the right side underneath, I put a small shadow on the lettering, just like so. And all this does is just lifts that lettering off the surface. And you'll notice it, you'll see it as we're working here, that lettering becomes more pronounced with that little shadow on there. And it's just a nice weak float of asphaltum. You can do it with black. I just find that black is a little strong and it's a little overpowering. And this is much more subtle. It just lifts the lettering enough. There we go. So you can see how that lettering has popped up right off the bat. So now we're going to use warm white for the lettering. It's my favorite color for this. One, it's nicely opaque, so you can very often get your lettering looking really good with just one coat. So I'm using warm white, and as usual, I like thinning my paint, not just with water. I like to use Jo Sonja's fast drying glaze for two reasons. One, it'll maintain the opacity of the paint and still thin it. It improves the adhesion of the paint, and it acts almost like a flow medium. It helps the paint move. So you're going to love working with this. Now the brush that I'm using for my lettering is a number 2 rigger. This is my go-to brush for painting lettering, and there's a couple of reasons why. It looks like a liner brush. Most people will look at it, and that's the first thing that comes to mind, is that it looks like a liner brush. But a rigger is built differently. When you load a liner brush and you press it down, it opens up with a curved edge. So it will open up and form an arch like this when the brush opens up. When you press down on a rigger, it opens up like a flat, and it has a chisel edge. So if I were to paint lettering, wherever I start the brush, that letter I'm going to have curve. And then it will only open up so far. With a rigger brush, it will open up and maintain a chisel edge. So I can paint on the chisel edge of the brush to pull a stroke. So for calligraphy, it's beautiful. It also means that I can paint very fine lines using that chisel edge, but it also means that I can paint nice spaces very quickly and very easily. So I've got my brush loaded with warm white, and I've got my rigger. So if I pat it on the palette, you can see it forms a flat chisel edge, whereas a liner would come to a point. So I can do this. I can paint, and then I press down, open up the brush until it fills the space. And then I can put up onto the chisel edge. Press down till it fills the space, and then lift up. And then that chisel edge will give you that nice fine line between. If you don't have a rigger in your brush bin, I recommend highly getting one, especially if you're doing any amount of lettering. This brush will save you so much aggravation. And again, I'm going to get nice, reasonably opaque lettering with only one coat of paint. And you notice that the lines, the edges are nice and clean. All you have to do is take your time. So I press that down, press down on the brush to open it up, pull it the length of the letter, and look how clean that is. And again, I come back up here on that chisel edge for all of those little details. This is a great little brush for lettering. So you just continue on, paint your lettering in, like so. Easy peasy. Oops, I whoopsied. Take a little bit of oh, the pen. Yes, it is a 0.38 Uniball. It's about the finest one they make. It's a fabulous pen. Okay, so I'm going to stop on that lettering. I'm going to dry this real quick so I can show you the next step. So bear with me. So there is another step to doing this lettering. I'm just going to get my sander. There's a sponge. Here we go. So once your lettering is done, take a medium to fine sandpaper and you're just going to lightly distress that lettering following the grain of the wood that you put down. So don't sand it this way if the grain of the wood is running that way. So I'm just going to lightly sand it. That just distresses it a little bit, softens the edges of the letters. And then we're going to add a shadow to the bottom of each of these letters. And we're doing that with a little bit of cobalt teal hue. I love this color. So, a little bit of cobalt teal hue. I keep sliding out of the shot, I'm being reminded. So, I'm going to pick up just a small quantity, and I do mean small quantity, of the cobalt teal. It's a very light. And at the bottom of each of these letters, you're going to put just a weak float of this color, like so. Just to the bottom. So, and in the end, this is what it looks like. So you have this nice bright, pretty blue along the bottom of each of those letters. So now we have to create sort of a rustic edge, and I thought I'd give you two options. Not everybody likes the super rustic look. So some of you might like to try this. This is a gold paint pen from Deco Color. It's an oil-based paint, this one. These are actually terrific pens. And so you can go around the outside edge of your surface with this pen and put a really nice gold bead along the outside edge. And it's quite elegant looking and quite pretty, and it finishes the edges really nicely. I personally really like this sort of chippy wood look. like the edges of it have, worn away over time, and they've just gotten really rough looking. So you're going to do that with either a round brush or a rigger or whatever type brush you work with. I'm going to grab a round, and we need a little bit of lamp black. And you load up that lamp black, and it's a goopy mess, but then you're going to just wiggle that loaded up round brush. Just roll it along so that it creates an irregular edge. Easy peasy. Just like that. And you can do that all the way around the outside edge of your piece. And then quickly, I'm going to make some more noise here. We'll just dry this real fast. And Patty Piatek asked me, is that a number 1 rigger? No, it's a number 2. I use a variety of sizes. The 0, the number 2, and the number 4 tend to be the ones that I use the most. And those are available at the Brush Guys. I did check this morning to make sure they had them in stock. So as of this morning, they still did. So just so you know. So now I want to pop this. I want this to jump a little bit. I take no credit for this particular little detail. Chris Hoy, I learned this from her, and I just think it's such a neat look. I think it's a really fun way to finish an edge. I take my liner or a rigger, and I'm just going to add a very fine scribbly white line to the edge, and I'm going to come in a few places, like at the edges of these boards, and it's just a tiny scribbly highlight. But I'll tell you, it is so effective. Chris is the queen of like funky little tricks. She's so cool. So yeah, that little highlight will pop that texture out. It doesn't need to be a hard line. You can stop and start if you want to. It's such an effective way to finish that edge. So we've done sunflowers, we've done funky finishing on the edge, we've done some lettering. I've showed you how to finish out all of these little bits. There's only really one more thing that we need to do. It doesn't look antique unless it's got spatter, so I like spattering things. I like that look. And I'm going to spatter this with a little bit of the lamp black first. And I do that using my fugly brush. I watch Sandy do it with the tap method, and I end up with huge gobs of paint on everything if I do it that way. So I've always liked the toothbrush method to spatter. So now I've got some black on there, and now I'm going to take a little bit of warm white just to give it a little punch of color, and to use up the warm white that's on my palette. And I'm going to spatter again with a little of the warm white. Not quite enough water in it. Had lots of paint, but no spatter. There we go. Little spatter of the warm white. And we're done. That's how fun these are to do. This is not a difficult piece to paint. Here we go. This is our finished one. So we've used the pen to create some squiggly lines around all of the petals and the leaves and all these little details coming off here. I don't necessarily use that on the lettering. I think that the shading and the lettering by itself is just fine. So a few little scribbles around it. Don't forget to sign your work. Put your name at the bottom and take credit for all of your hard work. All right, gang, I think that's it. We have painted sunflowers and family gathers here. I hope you enjoyed painting that. I know I did. do have one thing to talk about. Next week's live. I've already painted it. The pattern is already up on the website. And let me show you. We're going to paint this little guy. I think he'll be a lot of fun. I know I spent most of my time giggling and laughing about him. But yeah, we're going to paint this little fart on the on next Saturday's live. So bring your A game. Make sure you got some fun stuff to play with, some snow text or some texture mediums. And join me next Saturday, 1 p.m. right here on my Facebook page. This video will be available on my YouTube channel. Don't forget to comment and share the video. And if you want to see more videos, visit me on my YouTube channel. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you know when all of the new stuff goes up. Thanks for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun and I hope that you did too. Mwah. Take care. Bye.